welcome to the Album Nerds Podcast with your hosts, Andy, Todd, and Tood.
Oh, yeah. Here we are. It's the Album Nerds Podcast. We're back once again. I'm Dude. I got Andy and Don with me. Well, gentlemen, it's just so good to see you today. So, how you guys doing?
Great to see you too, buddy. Yeah, it's our 200th episode for all those who are been with us this many years. We've been doing the show.
200.
Yeah, congratulations, fellas.
Yeah.
Podcasts are funny. Like, you do a bunch of episodes, but then you go back to the beginning and it's cringy. Like, you know, you learn as you go, like with anything. So it's just it's a little weird to have that many out there when what our show is now is what I feel like our show is.
Yeah. It's still a little cringy though. So we haven't drifted that far.
That's true. I could listen to a show from a month ago and be embarrassed at what I said. We got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about 3 albums, going to answer a question. We're going to circle back and then talk about what we learned. And then we're going to spin the wheel of musical destiny to find out what kind of albums we'll talk about next time. But this week, we're celebrating 200 albums.
That's what I'm talking about!
In 2016, 2 friends decided the best way to connect with other passionate fans of music, and specifically the album format, was to produce a podcast. They called that podcast Album Nerds. Since then, Andy and Dude have released 199 episodes. Along the way, in 2022, beginning with episode 143, they asked a listener and fellow album nerd Don to join the show. This is the 200th episode of Album Nerds. To celebrate the occasion, we are taking a look at Rolling Stone's top 500 albums of all time. This list was originally published in 2003. It was updated in 2013 and again in 2020. To make that list, Rolling Stone tabulated top 50 album lists from more than 300 artists, producers, critics, and music industry figures. Today, on our 200th episode, we are each picking an album from Rolling Stone's top 200, but it has to be from an artist who has not been reviewed on an episode of the Album Nerds podcast.
Clever, huh? That tale you just spun. Yeah, man. I mean, this was harder than I thought because we've done 200 freaking episodes, many of which we've talked about a multitude of albums, and a lot of them are on this list.
Yeah. You might say we have pretty good taste.
Or you might say that we're trend chasers and not original at all. But yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that I would have liked to have looked at was like Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, but I couldn't. You know, Prince, Purple Rain, which for me might be the number one. Can't. We talked about Prince. But some of the stuff that I considered was Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. I just felt like that discussion for that album needs the right context, maybe on a hip-hop episode or something. I feel like it needs more than just like top 200. There's more to it than that. The Clash, London Calling, we haven't talked about them. But I'm satisfied with what I came up with. How'd you guys do?
A lot to pick from, a lot of interesting stuff. There were a handful of records I hadn't heard before, which is kind of what I ended up focusing on. But I'll mention a few that I had that I was considering. I listened to the B-52's self-titled album probably like 4 or 5 times now for different shows and just haven't picked it yet.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, we get some surf rock on here eventually. Jay-Z has like 3 albums in the top 200. Almost picked, I think the Black Album is my favorite of his, but he has a lot of good stuff. Lauryn Hill, we gotta get her on the show eventually. I've listened to Miseducation of Lauryn Hill probably like 5 or 6 times too.
Thought that was going to be the one, man.
Yeah, I really love that record. We'll get to it. And 9 Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral, pretty highly ranked on that list as well. Almost picked that. Lots of great stuff. I mean, it's hard to pick between like some of your favorite records and some of the all-time greats, so.
Yeah, it was kind of a frustrating experience for me. You know, that I'd be like, oh yeah, I love that album, and Neil Young Harvest. So I search it on the website, and it's like, oh, you guys talked about a Neil Young record for 20 seconds. But yeah, so
right.
So I seriously considered doing the Dusty Springfield record, Dusty in Memphis. I mean, she's somebody that people cite all the time as being a tremendous talent. So I almost did that record, and I'll probably revisit it in the future. I also spent time with that B-52's record and the Public Enemy. But yeah, I'm actually quite satisfied with my pick.
All right, well, let's get to it then.
You choose me?
most welcome to the stage with a great big round of applause, the star of the show, the one and only vocal recording star, Otis Redding.
Dude, that's how we should do the intros for our freaking show, man. Get the crowd hyped a little bit.
Yes, the crowd.
All right, so for my Rolling Stone Top 200 album selection, we are talking about Otis Redding and his 1965 album Otis Blue. Let's play a little bit from the second single. This is a little bit of I've Been Loving You Too Long.
And your love is growing cold.
All right, so this is the third studio album for the singer-songwriter from Dawson, Georgia.
I was hoping it was Dawson's Creek. That would have been really cool.
I don't think they're related. So the record is known for solidifying Mr. Redding as a commercial success. It had a lot of crossover appeal as it featured a bunch of covers from contemporary artists, including Sam Cooke. The track we just played is one of the 3 original Redding penned songs on the record. See a couple interesting tidbits. It was largely recorded over a 24-hour period in 1965.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like from like Saturday night to like through Sunday afternoon or something like that. Crazy.
That's how we should do this. Just record the whole year's worth of shows in 24 hours.
Oh man, that sounds fun. Yeah, so it garnered 3 singles, which became top 40 hits. We are going to get to those shortly. Yeah, the 3 words I use to describe this record are, can I live inside the record? I just love the feeling of this record. It's just such a warm, inviting sound. Not only his voice, but just the production and the band. And everybody just sounds so inviting. I was immediately taken by it. I hadn't heard this before this week of listening. And I was just immediately struck by how just good it felt to listen to.
Oh, his voice is like, I don't know how to describe it, but so he's being sung by the song as much as he's singing the song. You know, you can tell that the inspiration is coming as he's going. And I think that's part of what's cool about this era in recorded music, where sometimes you just go with the flow instead of it being so meticulous.
Yeah, right. It feels a little more spontaneous, a little more live.
Yeah.
All right, why don't we play another cut from the record? This is a little bit of You Don't Miss Your Water.
Oh, how I cry like you cry. You don't miss your water till you will run dry.
You Don't Miss Your Water was written and recorded by William Bell in 1961. Like everything he does, Otis made it his own. I really like that lyric a lot. You know, of course, it's such a cliche to sing about crying, but to sing about it in that way, like you don't miss your water till your well runs dry. I just think that's really cool.
It mostly just made me thirsty. Excuse me. Yeah.
Okay, buddy. Glad you got your well water over there.
The 3 words I chose to describe the album are Ducky Did Testify, right? And so this is that's just a stupid reference to the 1986 film Pretty in Pink by John Hughes. In that film, the character Ducky is like lip syncing and dancing in the record store to Otis Redding singing Try a Little Tenderness, which is not on this album, but you know, he's like really into it. And you know, that might even be like my first exposure to Otis Redding.
Me too.
So yeah, so thanks Ducky for the reference. Yeah, I mean, you guys already talked about the vocal talent, and I guess, you know, as you said, it's hard to describe, and maybe that's how you know somebody really is special, you know, because you can't describe it. He doesn't sound like anybody else. I mean, it can be somewhat crass or harsh at times, but like in a good way and like under control. But he also can do the, you know, soft, beautiful sounds. Yeah,
I was struck by that too. Like on the edges, it feels like his voice is very rough and ragged at times, and he almost sounds like he's straining, but other times he'll hit a note that just sounds so effortless and just so pure and beautiful and just perfectly soft and round. And it's a cool combination, man.
The voice really is an instrument. You know, I mean, you can do so much with it.
Plus, I think, you know, this is almost certainly 1 or 2 takes at the most.
Yeah.
You know, for these songs, which, like I said earlier, I think is what makes this interesting, especially when it's a bunch of covers. Besides the 3 originals, the reinterpretation, I think, comes easier if you just let it fly.
Yeah.
You know, you're not trying to do a special arrangement and la la la. You just do the song, sometimes without even knowing all the words.
Yeah.
Does he mess up some lyrics here, or what do you mean?
Oh yeah, we can get into that in a minute, though.
Okay.
So as you said, there's only 3 originals on this album. I do wish there were more because he obviously is a very talented songwriter. But I'm reminded of people like Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin and Johnny Cash who just turn songs into their own. Mm-hmm. And so he does just a great job of that.
Well, I just think it's funny you mentioned Aretha Franklin, who took a song from this album, Respect, that's his, and she made it her own, and the context of it completely changes. And her delivery of show me some respect when I get home. Yeah. So just that's really cool.
It was wild hearing like the male side of it. Like, all I want is when I come home, I just want you to treat me well. And and Aretha like totally flipped on its head, which is it's cool.
Yeah, I got a make me dinner vibe from his version and make your own damn dinner vibe from her version.
Yeah, exactly.
You can kind of see why her version became the definitive one.
Okay, why don't we play a little bit from one of those cover tracks? This is a little bit of I Can't Get No Satisfaction.
I can't get to no. We got to move it to go, man. Keep on knocking, baby,
yeah, I mean, so this album was 1965, right, Andy?
Yeah, I had to double check that too. When did that song come out?
1965. June 5th, 1965, the Rolling Stones released their recorded version that they wrote, Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. And what I was talking about earlier with the words, I mean, there's some missing lyrics. There's a bunch of made up, I got to get that, and all that kind of stuff that apparently, according to sources, Wikipedia, Otis Redding claimed that he didn't know the original lyrics of the song and he made them up as he went. Steve Cropper, who worked on the session, had to write the lyrics down from listening to the Rolling Stones version because that stuff just wasn't easily available on your interweb. So I think some of the words were a little wrong. He knew the vibe of the song and just kind of went with it. And I love it. I mean, I love this version. Ronnie Wood of the Rolling Stones said that later live performances by the Rolling Stones have been influenced by his interpretation, by Redding's interpretation.
Interesting. Yeah, he gets the feeling of it for sure, I think. The band sounds good.
It's a little more desperate. The Rolling Stones version is a little more like sneering and sort of lewd. Yeah. And Otis's is a little more like, I got to have you. There's more urgency in it, a little more passion.
True.
It really does demonstrate the similarities, between those 2 genres, rock and roll and R&B are, really come from the same place and have the same history.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Great performances on here from Booker T and the MGs. I never realized they were kind of his backing band.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, every time I listened to it, I looked forward to that interpretation of a super well-known song that no one dare reinterpret now, but he did it like a week later, and it's awesome.
Devo did a good job, too.
I doubt it. So quickly, the 3 words I used to describe this album were the man can sing. I mean, I already touched on that point throughout our discussion. Holy crap. I don't know that I've listened to Otis Redding whole albums before, and he's awesome. And that's all I have to say about that.
The other thing I'll just mention about this record specifically, and part of why I picked it, is it's right in that sweet spot in the mid-'60s where record companies started thinking about selling albums as entire entities and not just singles. And this, along with a couple other records from 65, are kind of considered like that first crop of like really great albums that it came into being and were like marketed as such. So it's a nice place to start this episode. And also, I'm glad that Rolling Stone saw fit to honor it by putting it on its list. Though I gotta say, in the original list, it started at number 73 or 78, I want to say, and now it's fallen all the way back to 178, which feels a little bit crazy to me. But regardless, still in the top 200.
Well, a couple, decades go by, you've got to add new artists in there too. Music continues. Albums keep getting made, so the future is now.
Thanks for holding that pose.
Sure.
All right, so once again, the record is called Otis Blue by Otis Redding. It's available on all the usual streaming platforms. Check it out if you haven't heard it. It's an excellent listen.
I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
If you're enjoying the show, and we hope you are, do us a solid and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Maybe we made you laugh. Maybe we made you cry. Maybe we made you throw your phone across the room. Or you discovered an album you enjoy. Leaving a review keeps the show going and helps other music fans find us.
200.
Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Okay, so the album I chose is from a band called T-Rex.
That's short for Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yes, and we'll get into that in a second. But the album's called Electric Warrior, released in September 1971. It was number 188 on the 2020 Rolling Stone Top 500 list. Let's hear the song that it's most known for. This is Bang a Gong, Get It On.
I've never understood why this guy wants people to have sex with gongs. It's just totally weird to me.
Okay, don't hate till you try it, buddy. Come on.
Just got to say, so last week I was listening to this on headphones while I was doing some weed whacking and some grass clipping blowing, and
and some gong banging.
I just could not stop myself from like strutting to this song. Yeah, kind of like the Mick Jagger strut. I think it calls for.
Yeah.
I think I actually saw that on YouTube. It said "crazy neighbor dancing in yard." Someone caught you.
Yeah. So anyway, that song was originally just known as "Get It On," but there's another band called Chase who had a song called "Get It On." So now it's officially "Bang a Gong" (parentheses Get It On). Mark Bolan, who's basically the main guy from T-Rex, claimed to have written the song out of his desire to record Chuck Berry's "Little Queenie," and said that the riff was basically taken from that Berry tune. Song actually features piano from Rick Wakeman, who you might know from the band Yes. Also saxophone from Ian MacDonald of King Crimson. So yeah, T-Rex is an English band formed in 1967 by singer-songwriter and guitarist Mark Bolan. The band was originally called Tyrannosaurus Rex and had a kind of like a psychedelic folk sound. Kind of reminded me of like Donovan. So, over time, Bolan embraced more like electric sounds, and in 1970 he officially changed the band's name to T-Rex. Electric Warrior is the second album since the name change, and there's 6 overall. So, Bolan is basically T-Rex with a rotating cast of characters. The main players on the album are Mickey Finn, who did like congos and bongos and does a lot of the backing vocals you hear, Steve Curry on bass, and Bill Legend on drums. The 3 words I chose to describe the album, I just said godfather of glam. It's always hard to pinpoint, where things began or who did it first. This album at least, predates, Bowie's The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and The Spiders from Mars. It predates the Roxy Music self-titled debut. This is really the beginning of glam and probably the first true glam record. Okay, well let's hear another track. This is a song called Planet Queen.
So Planet Queen, cool song. Kind of reminds me actually of Donovan's Hurdy-Gurdy Man, which the psychedelic stuff here is definitely on display in that particular track. The lyrics are poetic and surreal, fantasy. Maybe he's abducted by aliens. He's gonna, I don't know, make love to the Planet Queen's daughter. I didn't. It was just weird. It's nonsense for the most part.
Yeah,
I think
lyrically, I think he's just goofing around a lot.
Yeah, like he's sousing.
He does get pretty clever. Like you're built like a car. You've got a hubcap diamond star halo. I love that line.
Yeah, there's great lines.
It's interesting,
yes.
But it feels kind of throwaway.
Yeah, I think it's just going with it's sort of lyrically a concept of space, and then let's go. And then very rhymey. It's very rhymey, which I do like. The 3 words I used to describe this album, might be What a Weirdo, but instead I'm going with Wham Bam Glam, which is in the same category as what Don said. I think about Bowie and Wham Bam, Thank You Ma'am, and what came after, which I think ultimately was more interesting because there were more than those other artists were more than one flavor. T-Rex is kind of what T-Rex is, but I hear T-Rex in a lot of music today. Including King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Like, absolutely, this is an influence. There's no doubt. Especially some of the space stuff they talk about and the way that they do it. I didn't realize it until I experienced this album over and over again. And I started having little flashes of King Gizzard. So, yeah, fun listen.
Glam rock really dominated the UK charts from like 1972 to 1975. And it didn't really happen in the United States. There were American glam rock artists, like Lou Reed and the New York Dolls, the Stooges and stuff like that. But it didn't really have the commercial success that it did in Britain. Okay, let's hear the opening cut. This is Mambo Sun.
Yeah, I really like that track in particular. I came to like the whole record. I like the sound quite a bit. It's sort of strange sounding, I guess I would say. It's a little weird.
It's spacey.
Yeah, spacey. But it feels exciting. It does feel like they're kind of creating something new as they go, which I love. My 3 words are a bit wheezy, kind of cheesy, but goes down plenty easy.
So wheezy, cheesy, easy are your 3 words if we boil it down.
Yeah, if you want to get specific, sure. Go, how you were saying, like, he loves the rhymes in his lyrics here, so try to incorporate a little inspiration from him here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you nailed it, man.
Yeah, I mean, I liked his kind of, I would call his lyrics kind of goofy, a little campy perhaps, which I think kind of falls in line with where glam rock is headed. But he delivers them in such like a cool, kind of breathy tone that I found like really interesting. And totally agree with the dude. Like, wow, I hear so many bands doing like this style nowadays. King Gizzard for sure. That band or that artist called King Tuff we've talked about in the show, like they sound almost exactly like him at times. Sonically, I think the record maybe is a little samey as it goes on. I didn't feel like there was a lot of new stuff happening as it played on. The tracks are all short and tight though. They don't really give a lot of room for exploration, which I watched some of their live performances from the 70s and they jammed out hard, and it was mostly drum and guitar soloing, so I found that really cool. You don't get that on the record, but it's nice to know they have that capability. But yeah, I guess you got to talk about his guitars a little bit. Like seems like a pretty excellent guitar player. You don't get a lot of soloing on this record, but it seems like he was a pretty adept player, not so much about showing off. But yeah, I this was way more bluesy than I expected it to be. I appreciated that.
A couple more thoughts just sonically. I do think there's some tasteful use of strings, on a lot of the tracks, particularly like Cosmic Dancer. Also, the backing vocals. There's a lot of that, just weird sort of goofy stuff that Bowie ended up using a lot. And then just, one final thought, Cosmic Dancer is a song that I was familiar with in the past. Morrissey actually does a cover of it. But I always liked the line, "Is it wrong to understand the fear that dwells inside a man?" And it's just in the middle of this weird song where he's talking about dancing since he was 12, but there's that weird line in it.
That's the line that makes it worth listening to, because when it's like dancing from the womb, I'm in my tomb, like, okay.
Yeah, get that one nugget of truth in there and makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's only 188 on the Rolling Stone list, but I think it belongs in the Album Nerds Hall of Fame, so I am going to nominate it. Yeah, so, I think this is a definitive glam rock album. I think it's an important genre in the history of music. It kind of influenced punk and metal that came later. All that hair metal, we talked about. There's glam in that. It's produced by Tony Visconti, who is like a key figure in this glam rock movement.
Hey!
So what do you guys think?
I'm going to say yes. I mean, I agree with everything you said. It's a 200th episode. I don't want to make anyone sad, and by saying no. But yeah, it's a landmark album. It did pave the way for a lot of the stuff that's awesome today. And it's a great listen.
Andy.
Well, as much of a fan of dinosaurs as I am, I like this record. I don't think it's a definitive glam rock record, though. And I mean, I'm not the most knowledgeable person on glam rock, but I feel like it's a cool idea, but I don't think the execution is maybe as exciting as I thought it would be.
You know how many times you've shot us down?
200.
Are you going to triceratop my T-Rex?
Yeah. Stick my horns into your belly. Okay.
Stop.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a definitive record for me. Obviously, it's very influential.
That really bangs my gong, Andy.
I don't doubt the influence it's had, but I don't know if it would be the one that I would pick to represent the genre necessarily.
No one asked you.
Actually. So I'm going to say no, but we'll leave it up to the listening audience and see what they think. Go to our website or our Discord, albumnerds.com, to cast your vote. Sorry, Don.
Okay. Well, apologies to T-Rex, the Electric Warrior. Not an Einhoff inductee yet, but listeners, please save it.
200.
Excuse me. I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Yeah, well, it's that fun time on the show where we ask each other a question. So, at least you guys have produced 200 of these podcast episodes so far, and we hope people are taking, things away from them. What have you learned or discovered or been turned on to from another podcast?
Yeah, there's so much stuff I've learned from podcasts, man. It feels like it's like the new public education to some degree. I guess all this good information is freely available.
It's your Wikipedia.
Essentially.
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia. I'm sure that'll catch on.
Oh, man. Someone's going to steal that.
Trademark.
Is that all you have to do? You just say trademark?
I think
Yep.
so. No.
TM. Just say TM. Right. You're good.
Yeah. So I've listened to a lot of great podcasts over the year, but I'm actually wearing the t-shirt for a podcast that I enjoy called The Truth. And I thought I'd give that a shout out. It is immersive storytelling in the way that, like, if you remember, like, old timey radio programs used to be, where they would have like the footprints on, walking to the door and then like this creak of the door. They do all the cool effects and like really great voice acting and amazing original stories that will just blow your mind and have you like sitting in the car after you park somewhere just to hear how the story wraps up. And it's freely available. I think it's better than most crap on Netflix. So I would highly recommend The Truth podcast. It's available in all the usual places. And if storytelling is your thing, I think it's one of the better ones I've heard. So yeah, that'd be my recommendation.
In that case, I want to give you a recommendation, Andy. It's called The Weird Place. It's a Dana Carvey production, and it's basically like 5 episodes of like Twilight Zone type stories with Dana Carvey doing all the voices, and they have the footprint sound effects and all that stuff, telling kind of funny versions of Twilight Zone type stories.
The Weird Place. I'll check it out.
The Weird Place. All right, so for me, it's all about fantasy football. I mean, I've played fantasy football since 1999, but when I started listening to fantasy football podcasts, one in particular, the Fantasy Footballers, it took my interest to another level, hearing these guys, 3 guys so passionate about it and having so much fun with it. It also inspired me to want to do a podcast because they were having so much fun talking about this thing they love. So part of the reason we're here is because I was listening to those 3 dudes on the Fantasy Footballers and winning championships with the information. Now everybody knows about them, but at the time in 2015, they were brand new. They were recording out of someone's bedroom in one of their houses, and now they have a studio and they go on tour. And so, yeah, I learned not only about football but podcasting from those guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, I listen to so many podcasts, and I a lot of them are educational, but I'll just focus on one. There's one called Grammar Girl, Quick and Dirty Tips. Yeah. Yeah, the podcast, it's pretty short, but, every week she's talking about, sort of grammatical mistakes people make, or, there'll be explanations for why things are a certain way, explanations of like the Oxford comma and stuff like that. And I don't know why it interests me. Maybe because I like to be that guy that, criticizes people for their poor grammar.
And they love you for it, I'm sure.
But yeah, so it's Grammar Girl, Quick and Dirty Tips. What have you guys learned from other podcasts? Hit up the socials, go on our Discord and let us know.
Albumnerds.com/Discord.
200.
I prefer the purity of the human voice. Really, let me just demonstrate. All right. Well, so much drama in the LBC. It's kind of hard being.
So we're going with Paul Simon today in the album Graceland. We won't be going with his version of Gin and Juice, but I thought it was pretty interesting that he did it. It was a joke.
You gotta like the guy who will do something like that. It's funny.
So Graceland, the album released August 1986 by Paul Simon, number 46 on the Rolling Stone Top 200 that we worked from. It's a 7th solo studio album, and it's a blend of sounds. It's Paul Simon mixing things up with some influences from South African music, and it's quite the sensation. $7 million copies. It was a comeback for Paul Simon after a failed album before it. And that line, my traveling companion is 9 years old. He's the child of my first marriage. That's when I started to understand Paul Simon's style, that using short describers to set a scene and then kind of going on to the next thing, but just that crisp, clear delivery of his. The 3 words I use to describe this album are Ryman Simon's Rhythms. Ryman Simon's Rhythms. So he had an album called Ryman Simon. But it's a blend of his style, his vocal style, that crisp, clean delivery, the lyrical style, the little storytelling elements, and then the poetic that comes from it, and then this rhythm-driven South African music that inspired him. Apparently, he was inspired by a bootleg cassette of a South African street music called, Andy.
Man. We've talked about it before, but it's Mbaqanga. He traveled to Johannesburg in '84 to collaborate with local musicians, and then additional recordings took place in the United States. There were some controversies because there were embargoes on things in South Africa. We weren't supposed to mix with them because of apartheid, so there was a lot of controversy about whether he should or shouldn't have done that, if any rules were broken. But we get to another song and see where the conversation takes us. This is But I think that one nicely encapsulates the sound that he achieves on Graceland, which I think is awesome. And it's a real achievement to Paul Simon and what he was open to exploring in his career. And I think he still explores even to this day in his career. My 3 words are, it's better together. This is like one of those rare cases where the idea for the record itself, I think, sounded terrible on paper, but it worked out beautifully. And he really did create something unique and new and exciting. And I don't know if it's really been replicated since then. It's this amalgamation of all these different sounds. Part of it is South African influence, but there's also things from the US too, like Zydeco is pretty prevalent on the record. And there's still pop and folk influences here as well. And it all just comes together. And I think what makes this so cool is it doesn't try to sound like it's saying something specific about South Africa or apartheid. It's just like its own thing existing naturally in the world, and it works really well.
It's celebrating the sounds. I mean, that rhythm in that music is unique, and then finding a way to blend that with good old Paul Simon with some of the same kind of affectations he would have done in an acoustic album. It is unbelievable that it worked.
It's a small miracle.
And people freaking loved it. Well, and the artists included, like the South African male choral group Ladysmith Black Mambazo, came to be known because of this. And they ended up having a lot of success in the U.S. after this album. They toured with him. Other artists that played on this got writing credits on the songs. I mean, it wasn't Paul Simon just taking a sound and stealing it and making it all about him. I would have liked to have seen the Paul Simon and blah, blah, blah on the album cover, but...
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd read a little bit about the background of it, and I got the impression almost... I mean, he paid the artists very well for their time on the recordings, and they got, like you said, a lot of notoriety from the record.
All right, so Big Time album. Why don't we listen to the Big Times?
So that bass there, that was a guy named, I'm not butcher his name, Bagiti Kumalo, who's a South African bass player. That bass solo there is palindromic. Basically, the first half of it they recorded, and then they just played it backwards.
Interesting.
So yeah, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, I mean everybody knows that song, so I just wanted to focus on that little instrumental part there. One thing I really like on that song is that the muted string guitar there, which I think actually is a 6-string electric bass, which is an instrument I'm kind of obsessed with because that's what Robert Smith plays on Disintegration. So yeah, I think that's Paul Simon playing that part. So the lyrics to "You Can Call Me Al" basically to me seems like a midlife crisis kind of thing, and the origin of the title is supposedly a French composer and conductor named Pierre Boulez was attending this party with Paul Simon and his wife Peggy Harper. This Boulez guy basically called him Al, and he called his wife Betty. And so that's where it came from. Another interesting fact about that song, that saxophone hook there, I mean, that's several layered saxophones, but also in there is a synthesized guitar that kind of sounds like a saxophone that was done by the guitarist Adrian Bello. So the 3 words I chose to describe the album, never stand still. So Paul Simon, even going back to Simon and Garfunkel, I mean, he's just an artist that's constantly reinventing himself. He never gets comfortable doing just one thing. He's always challenging himself. And I mean, he just does an amazing job here, borrowing from, Zulu sounds and stuff like that and Zydeco. But, I think people can get the wrong impression if they don't listen to this album that it's just Paul Simon doing Zulu music or Paul Simon doing Zydeco. And it's not. It's a Paul Simon record that's just, using these influences. So it's like it's if you follow his career, he's always done that. He's like a sponge just absorbing all these things, and he integrates it into his unique songwriting. His songwriting is a bit different. I think on this album, it's more of like a groove-based songwriting, whereas I think in the early days it was more about like a melodic hook. Although there are plenty of those on this album. There are some really pretty parts and some nice melody.
I feel like lyrically on this record, I have a hard time following what he's talking about. Like, it feels like a lot of like in-jokes, like kind of like you were describing there about the dinner party. Whereas past records, I feel like I can understand where he's getting at more. I don't mind it in this context because the music's so interesting, but do you find like you can follow these songs?
I think at this point in his career and life, I think he was on his 2nd divorce. This was with Carrie Fisher. And like even Graceland was started about that. About his divorce and his place in his life that he's at. The Graceland part came from the sound of the song. It reminded him of old Sun recordings, the groove of it. And so the Graceland word was stuck in his head, and then he decided to take a trip to Graceland to fill in the song. And so that's kind of what, listening to it throughout my life, I've always kind of felt like he looked left and wrote about it. He looked right, he wrote about it. He woke up from a dream, remembered something, wrote about it. That's what it felt like.
Doesn't the album sonically, doesn't it feel sort of spacious? Like I feel like it's like a big open field or something.
Feels like a road trip, like you're on a drive.
To me, it feels more like an island beach setting, just like where things are open and vast and you can see far.
Maybe because as a youth, I never saw an island or a beach
in the Midwest,
part of the Midwest I was living in. So, yeah, it was about flat plains and long drives.
Well, same idea, that far horizon idea.
All right, so, this is a highly acclaimed album, considered one of the best of all time, and he did some amazing stuff here and captured me as a teenager when this was old people music, but there was still something special about it, and I've loved it throughout my life. So I'm going to nominate this for the Album Nerds Hall of Fame. And a yes from me.
Yeah, I think I will go yes on this one as well.
Oh, face, Don.
I've always really liked this record, and it holds up. It still sounds really cool. And I still stand by there's really no other record that I've ever heard. It sounds this blend of genres. It's cool.
Yeah, and just because Andy likes it, I'm kind of like I'm feeling like I don't want to say yes, but
don't punish me, man.
This is why I don't nominate records anymore. I don't want to. It's anxiety. Right?
Yeah. We're out for blood,
yes,
Andy.
This is definitely this is a great album.
Woohoo! All right, welcome, Paul Simon. Yet another notch on the bedpost, another accolade. That was Paul Simon's Graceland, newly inducted Album Nerds Hall of Fame member.
Okay, so we took a journey through the top 200 of Rolling Stone's list of greatest albums of all time. What did we learn?
There's a reason we don't do a lot of lists on this podcast. I think lists are just rife for problems and critiques. And obviously, they've edited things a lot over the years. I know people were pretty upset when this list first came out, and people are always going to be upset. But I think they did a pretty good job. Like, there weren't a lot of, glaring admissions. I mean, the one, probably the biggest thing you could say is, these are all artists from, the western part of the world, generally. And you really ignore more than half of the globe.
And largely mainstream hit making for the most part. There's not a lot of deep dive, unknowns on here.
Totally. I did appreciate the amount of hip hop that is represented, especially in the top 100. There's quite a bit, though it's mostly 90s hip hop.
One thing I struggled with is some of the more recent artists that are in there. Some of them are quite high on the list. People like Taylor Swift and Beyonce, and nothing against those artists or modern music, but I feel like we're not removed enough from this era to really know where those records stand. It's easy to, point to a Beatles record and recognize its influence, but, I'm not sure what Taylor Swift's legacy is or Beyonce's.
I think that leans into what I learned, which was this isn't static. So today, this is the truth, and that's why they redo it, and it's based on people's opinions. Stuff changes, and that's what I learned is that these lists move with the time, and I'd like moving with them.
And that's one to grow on.
I'm your density. I mean, your destiny.
200.
All right, boys and girls, gather around. It's time once again to get out that wheel of musical destiny and see what Wadbot has in store for us next week. Let's give it a spin.
Whispering rain on the window, albums spin in the haze. The music you play cuts through the grey. Your musical destiny is to contemplate rainy day albums.
Rainy day albums.
It's very subjective.
I like that.
Could be fun.
Doesn't have to necessarily be about rain, but something you'd want to put on while it was raining.
What's your favorite rainy day album? What else are you listening to? Let us know. Join fellow album nerds on Discord at albumnerds.com/Discord. You can email us at podcast@albumnerds.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at albumnerds. And please subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast app. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so via PayPal at albumnerds.com/support.
Thank you once again for joining us on the Album Nerds podcast. Maybe this is your 200th time. Maybe it's your first. Either way, come back next week. We'll be talking about rainy day albums.
What up? Thanks for listening, everybody. Catch you on 201.
Happy 200. A man walks down my street, says, "Why am I recording a podcast? Why am I recording a podcast when everything I have to say is dumb, dumb?"
So the B-sides of Graceland there, man?
Yeah, I just wrote that in the middle of the show.
That's great, man. Wow.
200